Hello, everyone, and welcome into another episode, or another interview, I should say, here on the Giant Tape Podcast. We haven't done one of those in a while. I'm getting a little rusty at it, but we have had this guy on a few times before, if you've been an avid listener of the show. Bobby Skinner of Talkin Giants. I'm sure you're an avid listener of their show with Jomboy Media and Jam Football as well. Bobby, great to talk to you today. How you doing?
Good to jump on and talk about the most exciting team in the NFL, the New York Giants.
Yeah, you can't go wrong with the Giants right now. I mean, almost, what is it? 200 plus yards by Saquon Barkley yesterday. It's great time in Giants land. No vision going forward, no hope. It feels like almost.
And, I disagree, Alex. Yeah. That's all we have is just hope. There's like no plan. Well, it's just hope.
True. No, I guess plausible hope. It's more just manifesting hope in your head. I feel like at this point is kind of what has to be done, but. Yeah, it's not. We haven't talked to you, I guess, this season or since the season really.
I thought I talked to you guys early, maybe right after camp or early season. I know
before everything derailed completely into the dumpster fire that it is today. But yeah, no, not a fun season, and I'm sure it wasn't fun for us, and obviously you do even more Giants coverage than we do, so I can only imagine how disappointing and rough this year was for you.
Hey, we're 0-0 though, so it's good.
True. There you go.
The film breakdowns, I mean, week after week, obviously appreciate it for sure. For us, as watching them every week, I know they're not the best, especially when you have to break down. You have no idea what's going on both sides of the ball. I wanted to ask you first, Bobby, to get into things because there's a lot we could talk about here. I really want to get your thoughts on specifically two things, but we'll start out with what I like the most, which is John Mara's press conference, because obviously we heard your thoughts on your show, but I wanted to kind of for you to reiterate that for our listeners about what the hell, it's kind of like the meme. Have you ever seen that? It's like, what the hell is even that? What was that press conference, not press conference that we saw on the turf of, over there at Quest Diagnostics Center from the Giants president, John Mara?
That was one of the most honest press conferences I've ever seen an owner have, while also not firing it, while also saying, hey, but we're going to keep everything the same. Like the line I think we'll look back at, 3 years from now when we talk about Joe Schoen, it's like, can you believe that John Mara said that he's not sure the roster is better 3 years later, but I'm deciding to keep them? Like that's kind of that's craziness to think that. And it's not like part of that is because you traded up for a quarterback and it didn't work out or something. It's like, no, you didn't even think you're like one of the only teams that not even draft a single quarterback in the draft. So it was honest, but it's a kind of the mind of John Mara where we talk about the hope thing, where it's like his main priority for keeping them was he didn't want to change everything. As simple as that. He didn't want to go through another GM search and have him come in and change everything and have to go with all that. So he's just hoping that they turn this around to a point where it's either going to work or they could keep him for another year 5 or whatever. But it definitely didn't inspire confidence, and it's going to put every Joe Schoen move this offseason under the looking glass because we know that he's on the hot seat. So we're going to look at is he doing this because of just for his job security or because it's what he truly thinks is best for the Giants?
Yeah, I mean, it was a total train wreck. And I think you kind of touched on this, but he couldn't give one actual reason as to why they deserved another year. You mentioned the roster better than it was 3 years ago. There was no talk of anything that Brian Dable or Joe Schoen said to him personally that made him believe that, they were the right option going forward. He didn't share any anecdotes whatsoever from that front. So it was a really odd, like you said, it was one of those press conferences that it was maybe you just fired your head coach and GM type press conference, but even more candid than you'd usually be after that. So it was just a very, very odd, almost, I wouldn't want to say temper tantrum, but it almost had that kind of tone to it. At least that's kind of how I felt.
Even like you said, even if they got fired, I wouldn't have expected to be that brutal.
Yeah, exactly.
I remember Dave Gettleman and Joe Judge on press. I went back and watched that, the week before the season ended, just to like kind of get a thought of it. There was really none of that. So yeah, it's just a wild spot where the Giants, Nobody looks at this as like this is a desirable. This is it's going to turn around now. Hey, the hope is always quarterback, right? You get a quarterback, you've got hope, and you've got something to really believe in. But we'll see if the Giants can have an opportunity to pick a guy they want, or if the guy they want ends up working out. But I just feel like they're putting too many eggs in that basket, and we'll see what they try and do to build around that quarterback. But it's there's a lot of needs on this team, and whenever you look at and say, "Oh, that's a decent starting group," the depth is not there at all. It's just, unfortunately, it's just a rough team after 3 years of roster building. Just comes down to 2 failed drafts.
Yeah, and I feel like we're sitting here now, Bobby, like a day or two after now the NFC divisional games, and you look at the Commanders, who obviously they brought in, Adam Peters, they brought in Dan Quinn, and the fact that they've been able to turn that team around so quickly into possibly a Super Bowl contender at this point, of course, if they beat the Eagles, and how they've been able to turn that around with just bringing in a guy like Jaden Daniels, who, of course, Giants fans were begging for last draft. And now you see the Eagles, who obviously have signed Saquon Barkley. They've built sustained success by just having depth. And I think you look at like the Mekhi Becton story. Like, when is the last time the Giants have taken a player like Mekhi Becton's situation? Of course, this isn't a common situation, but made it work and figured it out, right? People compare it to the Evan Neal situation, right? They brought Mekhi Becton in. They tried him out at guard. He was a Pro Bowl caliber guard in the NFL. And, why can't the Giants, I don't want to say have that ability, I guess, to kind of go through and just improve players. No players get better, I feel like, as they come to the Giants, but they sure as hell get a lot better when they walk out the door.
I think they have just a bad self-evaluation problem, and their roster's not very good. So your best players don't look as good as they can on other teams, and your good players don't look as, they just don't look as good as they can with their other surroundings. Like, you go down the list, Xavier McKinney, we knew Xavier McKinney was really good. Like Saquon Barkley, and I didn't know Saquon Barkley would do this, but I was like, look at what's happened on the Eagles with Miles Sanders and DeAndre Swift. Saquon's gonna have a really good year if he stays healthy. So I don't even view it as, I think they just have a bad self-evaluation process, right? I mean, look, I think Josh Azudu is the prime example. It's about position changes. Like, you drafted him 67th overall to be a guard for you. Like, we've like, think about, like, okay, JMS is a 2nd-round pick, Josh Azudu is a 3rd-round pick, and we talk about JMS, he hasn't worked out, but JMS is a clearly better player than Josh Azudu by miles. Their picks were separated by 10 picks, because Azudu was at the top of the 3rd, and they never really gave him a chance at guard. Like, the training camp last year, they begged him to win the starting job. He wasn't ready for it, which is, I think, predictable for the type of player he was. Instead of letting him just continue to work at guard, they move him to tackle. That's a completely failed project. And then you go into the 3rd offseason, like, okay, guard, right? Let's see guard. And they decided that he's not even going to practice a guard. He's simply just a tackle. Andrew Thomas gets injured. Josh Azudu comes in, he stinks, and then they're like, shit, this guy shouldn't be our starting left tackle. Let's put in Chris Hubbard, the guy we signed last week to the practice squad. Like, I feel like that's the best example of where we talked about that decision, and it made you feel stupid because, like, well, they're NFL personnel people. Like, there's clearly they're seeing that I'm not, and then it happens. They're like, no, they were just clearly wrong about this. Now, Neal, I'd like to see Neal move to guard. I don't view him the same way I do as Mekhi. Mekhi always moved people. He had better feet. I think he's actually more athletic. He had some good moments at tackle where Neal's never really had that, but I do think he'd be better off at guard just because tackle's clearly not it for him.
I want to shift back to that Mara press conference and tell me if I was moving fast to think this, but when he continuously kind of took upon to say, the defense is bad, the defense needs to be better, immediately I'm thinking Shane Bowen's out of here. He's not the Giants defensive coordinator. And if anything, that's like the one firing they make because he just talked about that they're keeping Joe Shane and Brian Daboll. But then they kind of go a different light or a different way. Maybe it wasn't a good thing. Maybe it wasn't a bright thing of firing the secondary coaches. What are your thoughts on that? And why is Bowen because I'm still wondering, why is Bowen still here? So why is he still here? And why is a guy like Jerome Henderson not here anymore?
I think Bowen's still here because if they couldn't get their priority at DC last year, I don't know why they believe they'd be able to do that this year. Now, I still would love to go like take a swing and pull some guy out of college and maybe you strike gold. Where I think Shane Bowen's a very bland defensive coordinator. But I actually, if they're keeping Bowen, which is again like if you're not firing Dable, tell me why you would fire Bowen but not Brian Dable, right? The defense was a lot better than the offense. The defense was held back by the offense. It wasn't the other, it wasn't switched on that where Jerome Henderson was, promoted before ever coaching a game under Shane Bowen to the pass game coordinator. So I actually don't mind if Shane Bowen wants to get his own DB coach and pass game coordinator. But my worry is that they're scapegoating Jerome Henderson on Deontay Banks' lack of progression and the fact that they don't like guys who are vocal in criticism. And Henderson has been not afraid to criticize players like Banks, and Banks also was kind of felt singled out by that too. So you hope it's not scapegoating. I don't think it's the worst thing in the world that Bowen wants to get his own DB coach, but it's just if everything feels backwards because it's like, all right, well, again, if these guys are gone, why aren't the guys who are most responsible for all this gone?
So then I'll quickly follow up here, Alex, and then I'll let you chime in. I wanted to just ask them about Deontay Banks and those like effort issues. And as you said earlier, like at every position you look at it and then you say there's no depth here. So, looking at that cornerback spot, and I know the Giants might very well address this with that third pick if they keep it. What's your opinions right now after watching year 2 of Deontay Banks and just that lack of depth at the cornerback position? Just what do you evaluate? Because we'll talk about draft, I'm sure, towards the end. But what do you evaluate of the current cornerbacks on this list in this Giants roster? Because there aren't many of them.
I think Banks can be a solid cornerback too. Right now, he's not even that, but I think he can become that. You saw how I thought he actually got better as a player this year, but when he was covering wide receiver ones, his weaknesses were just exposed, and that's the main thing being ball skills. Your ball skills aren't going to be put to the test as much when you're covering the team's second best wide receiver because they're just not going to be as willing to throw tight window throws. So I think that Flawed is a good backup. Now his size limits what you can do with him. He'll always be limited. And then Drew Phillips, really good run defending nickel corner. Got to see more out of him in coverage, right? He didn't really have any forced incompletions this year, no pass breakups. Did have an interception, but that was the overthrown ball by Flacco where it just landed in his chest. So I feel like Phillips is obviously your day one starter, and then hopefully they could find someone to take that cornerback one role, and maybe that position group is looked at like a strength. If Banks makes a couple more steps, put in a lesser role, and then you get a good cornerback one in there. So that's actually a position group that I think is not – I guess it is far off because you can't just slide in, get a cornerback one. But if you got that, I feel like it rises – the other ships rise with that.
And the early season concerns for Banks with the effort issues, that doesn't concern you? Like, I mean –
a little. Like, because there's people think he smells himself too much. Like if – players thought that he needed to be humbled. So yeah, definitely a little bit. Not necessarily like, I'm worried that he's going to have a play that he gives up in week 7 next year. It worries me in the what is your preparation look like in season? What is your prep? What kind of work are you putting in the off season? So it doesn't worry me as far as like, hope he doesn't quit on a play on Monday Night Football again. It worries me in the sense of, Are you putting in everything you can to this?
Yeah, and I think, you mentioned, Bobby, like, this could be a strength on the roster if they can kind of slide in a CB1, which, of course, easier said than done. But you kind of look position by position. You were mentioning this earlier as well. I can't really name a position group on this team as a whole, right? Obviously, you've got stars. You've got Andrew Thomas. You've got Dexter Lawrence, very premium high-end players in this league. But as a group, I don't think there's any position group, maybe the edge rusher group, that you could say is better on average than the average NFL team. Like, I don't know. I'm like going through my head. I'm cycling through right now. Obviously,
I'd say wide receiver.
Wide receiver. Okay, that's fair.
You have Neighbors. I like Slayton more than most people. And Wandale, while his stat line is very funny, I think is a serviceable slot wide receiver. It's not this great wide receiver room, but I think that's the strength of their team is the wide receiver room.
Yeah, no, that's definitely fair. I just look at it like you look at other teams like the Eagles. Every single group on their team is above average compared to the rest of the NFL, bar maybe a couple of positions.
I mean, yeah, but you're talking about a conference championship team, a
Oh,
possible Super Bowl contender.
well,
We're
of course.
far from that, as we know.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying, like, if
That's
you
the
can get
issue,
a
though. Is
few
like, but
groups,
we need, we need like a few. Like, let's get some points of strength.
Yeah.
You know, right? Like, I'm a big Abdul Carter fan,
Mhm.
and I'm not saying who I want drafted yet. And listen, I like Travis Hunter. I think he'd be sick, but the fact that we need a corner more than we need an edge, on paper, does not sway me in my decision on who to draft of those two. If I think Abdul Carter is better and a better long-term player in the NFL, I'm taking him 10 times out of 10. Like, how about we, like you said, like let's take a position group and make it really fucking good, because we don't have any of that. And I don't think the way to do that is by, well, let's fill this spot, fill this spot, fill this spot. I think that's how you get average to below average position groups throughout. And I think that's why I looked at Joe Shane's first draft and I was like, that looks like a draft to fill positions, because you need a starting tight end, you need a safety, you need a linebacker, like you need all these things. And instead of taking what you thought were best player available, look like you just tried to fill 10 different roles. And when you do that, you end up really only filling about 3 roles because the other 7 don't turn out into good players.
Yeah. And I think Dave Gettleman, to his flaw, was probably overly best player available, no matter the scenario, no matter what's going on. Joe Shane, I think, is on the complete polar opposite end, but just as bad, where he is a serial position need drafter. I can't remember a single time, at least in the later rounds, at least in my opinion, where he took the best player available over a position of need, at least in a significant way. And I think that's one of his main flaws as a drafter, and that's why he has been very unsuccessful, at least in those first 2 drafts, right? Deonte Banks, you could argue there were better players on the board there as well. He went either wide receiver or corner because that's what the Giants really needed at that time. And I think that's why you probably won't see Abdul Carter get drafted by the Giants, is just because I don't know how he can justify to his own philosophy to have Kayvon Thibodeau, Abdul Carter and Brian Burns all on the same team, potentially Azeez Ojulari if they brought him back.
Exactly.
I don't know how he justifies that to his own ideology, and I think that's the problem, but that shouldn't be a problem.
I think that is a problem. That's why a fresh, new eyes, let's say, Bobby Skinner gets hired as GM, will probably end up failing in 3-4 years, but still, my year one, I'd look at that edge room and I'd be like, yeah, Brian Burns, really good player, top 5 player on the team. He's not a top 15 edge in the NFL. Is he really good? Sure, but I did this in my head. There's 14 for sure's, and then let's debate. So is he being the reason I win a Super Bowl as the top guy? No. Okay, Kayvon Thibodeau, he's not looking like the 5th overall pick. Don't want to get rid of him. I'll pick up that 5th-year option, and we'll see what we have. But he's not stopping me from picking anyone. Oh, Azeez Ojulari, we'll offer you 2 years, $4.5 million. You're too injury prone. If you don't want to take that, go somewhere else. If you do, we'll pay you that to be the 4th edge rusher to Abdul Carter and draft Abdul Carter. And now we have Abdul Carter, who ends up being our number 1, hopefully. Brian Burns is now number 2. And guess what? If there's any fan base who should fucking buy into that, it's the New York Giants. We won 2 Super Bowls while having 3 edge rushers, Strahan, Tuck, and OC, and then Tuck, OC, and JPP. And guess what? I remember my first reaction when we drafted JPP in the first round. I was like, defensive end? We have defensive ends. Guess what? When he, blocking field goals and have, the best player on that rookie defense, ended up working out for us.
No, absolutely. I completely agree that, defense does win championships, but also what we're seeing, especially in these playoffs in the last years of the NFL, the modern NFL, the quarterbacks obviously has a huge part in that. So I want to get to that too, because that's a big deal right now for the team, because we have no idea who's going to be the starting quarterback moving forward. So I guess up to you, Bobby, how you want to answer this, what you want the team to do, or what you think you want the team, or what you think the team is going to do, I should say, or maybe a little bit of both. What's going to happen? Are the Giants going to get a stopgap here? Are they going to look for the 3rd pick of a quarterback, a 2nd round Jackson Dart type of situation? What's going on at the quarterback position for the Giants in the future?
I think Shador Sanders ends up being their quarterback. They'll probably have to sign somebody in free agency too. But I feel like that's where we're headed. I think Cam Ward would probably, to me, is the better quarterback. But I think Shador might be the better quarterback in their eyes. And I think there's a lot better chance of him being available at 3 than people think. And I think that's where the Giants end up. I think they end up with Shador Sanders as their starting quarterback next year, or at least their number 1 pick in the draft.
Now, do you think they potentially, because there's this playoff mandate allegedly, right, set by John Mara, no matter how unrealistic that may be, do you see them that kind of forcing Joe Shane's hand and maybe going with a veteran quarterback, such as a Russell Wilson or a Justin Fields or whoever else might be available? Kirk Cousins, for example.
I think they do that regardless if they draft a quarterback or not.
True.
Just to have some type of insurance for them. And yeah, that's if like say they draft a quarterback, and it's just weird how these teams play. But I do see that now. There doesn't feel like a great free agency for that. Justin Fields seems to be like the smartest bet, but also there's probably 5-6 other teams who view that as the smartest bet too. So what does his contract end up being? Russ, get in there. Kirk, it would have to be paired with a rookie QB, because if he just can't move or throw the ball like he could this year, then that I don't care how smart he is, that doesn't work. So yeah, I see them actually doing both, but I think the main thing is they end up getting Shador Sanders in the draft.
Hey, come on, Sam Darnold, come back to New York just wearing the Giants blue instead of the Jets green.
Yeah, that's the only thing they can't do. Do not go and pay the biggest money free agent quarterback. Please don't do that.
You think he still gets big money after those games?
Yes, absolutely. Like
really?
at least $30 million per year, 25 mil per year at the least.
But I think he probably knocked himself down. He was probably at $40 million, and now he's probably at 30. Maybe 25.
Yeah, those games had to, I would assume, knock him down a little bit. Okay, so I guess then now looking ahead, what I'm trying to figure out how I want to phrase this. But I guess I'll ask it honestly, plainly. If you're a Giants fan right now, like, what is there to hope for?
Quarterback.
What? Okay.
I mean, it's really. I hate to be so simplistic. But that's the hope, is you get a quarter. Because let's say they take Abdul Carter, and in 3 years from now, Shador Sanders and Cam Ward suck, and you're like, man, good thing we did that. This season's still not going to be fun, because they won't have a quarterback. But the hope is you get the quarterback right, and obviously once you get that right, it makes everything about being an NFL team easier. Does it make you a Super Bowl contender overnight? No. It can. I mean, look at Jaden Daniels, but that's obviously the exception, not the rule. But that's the hope. That's the way to inject life back into being a Giants fan. Is you get a quarterback, you put all your eggs in that basket, and you hope it works out.
So you mentioned Shador as like your prediction, I guess, for who the Giants select. Would that be like you see? I don't know how much you've looked into the quarterbacks. I know you've looked a little bit into it, but do you see Shador as the right move for the Giants if there's guys like Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter also sitting there on the board, or is that something that you'd, think long and hard about, and you wouldn't just submit the Shador button right at the?
I haven't watched Shador a ton.
Yeah,
I did watch that bowl game in full against BYU. Watched a little bit from last year, and then casually, watched them against NDSU early in the season. That game they lost versus Kansas. Remember watching that in the New Jersey hotel room. I don't come away from being super impressed with him, and he's also not the guy you're not super impressed with, and you're like, but he's so raw. It's like, nah, he's kind of the opposite of that, where his best thing going was like his understanding of the game and his polishness and his footwork and shit like that. So you don't see that. When I watch Cam Ward, I get excited, all right? Now there's a few plays per game where I'm like, that scares the shit out of me. That's really bad. That's really dumb. Are you going to do that consistently in the NFL? It's a lot harder. But I at least watch enough where I get excited about this as a player. With Shador, I don't really see that consistently.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's been really tough. It's a really tough season. I know the worst since we started the podcast in our freshman year of high school, and it's been about 5-6 years now. And I think for you guys, you would say pretty much the same, right? Or was 20? What would that be? 2020?
Yeah, this was the worst. This was the
Okay.
worst because not only that, you had players that left who were thriving. Now you keep the GM and head coach and just hopes of it working out. When you don't like, there's nothing to make you believe in it. So, yeah, I'd say this is the worst because at least 2021 ended, and then it's like, all right, Gettleman gone, Judge gone. Let's bring in a new era. And that, like, the quarterback they were what 4-4, like they were like 4-6 or whatever when Daniel Jones got hurt or whatever it was, and then he got hurt, and all those games were lost then. So at least there was like an excuse for that team falling apart. You got Jason Garrett got fired. That was a fun moment. So yeah, this definitely was the worst.
It's rock bottom for sure.
There you have it. All you've been trying to say is only up from here. So I guess that starts as
don't say that. Don't say that. Every time people say it can't get worse, it always gets worse. That's what, like, I'm sure you guys listen to the show. I remember once it was like talks of Daniel Jones being benched started happening at week 8 or whatever, and we're obviously talking about it on the show, and I'm like losing my mind because I'm like, I understand everyone's in here saying it can't get worse. It can't get worse. I'm like, I bet you that it will. I bet you that it will get worse with Drew Lock. You're calling for that. And right now you're going to call me an asshole and all this. And then come a game against the Falcons when you have 2 pick-6, you're going to be saying the same thing. And I'm not going to victory lap because I'm not going to be like, oh, look how much better Daniel Jones was, because he still stinks, but it can get worse. And unfortunately, in New York Giants lands, that's been like a punchline. Like, it can't get worse. It's like, yes, it does. And it will. It will get worse. So don't ever say that again, Josh.
It might get worse. It hopefully will not get worse.
Yeah, that's a new line. Like, hey,
there we go.
It probably will get worse, but hopefully it doesn't. That's the new line.
The odds are low that it'll be worse, but it's still possible it'll be worse.
Oh, that's great. Oh my goodness. All right, Bobby, last question. Super Bowl picks. What do you got?
I picked Lions Chiefs before the year, and I was really excited about that. And then the Lions shit the bed against the Commanders.
Yeah.
So I'm going to stick with Chiefs, and we get our first NFL three-peat over the Commanders. I'm taking if Jalen Hurts is injured, I'm taking the Commanders over the Eagles.
All right, there you go. Commanders over the Eagles. Chiefs, three-peat from Bobby Skinner. If you're watching, you see his username, but I'll read it to you if you're listening. At Bobby Skinner _ on Twitter. Talkin Giants versus the world. JM football, all the good stuff. Bobby, thank you so much again for joining us. We really appreciate every time you hop on here, so thanks for making the time.